welcome to Artist Alchemy, everyone. I'm John Cruz. I'm a portrait photographer based in Philadelphia in the US.
And I'm Steph. I'm a fantasy photographer based in Lincoln in the UK.
And today our guest is Rich Sanford, Rich the Architect as his podcast name. Rich is an architect based in New Jersey. He works in both the states of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Rich and I actually were, when my first run at being an architecture major, Rich and I lived in the same dorm with each other. So some time ago.
So like, I think 2 or 3 doors down from each other, different wings, but we were both kind of like right in the center and like a couple doors down. Yeah.
That's
so
really
we've
cool.
known each other a very long time. Rich finished his degree the first time and then went on to be an architect. I took a long way and then went and got my architecture degree years later. So various processes. So Rich, thanks for hopping on. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you.
As we were saying, this is just we have no idea what we're doing. So we just want to talk to creative people. And so
I don't know what I'm doing either. So here we go.
Whoa, winging live.
But because of my background, I love nerding out on talking about architecture and design. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
All right. Yeah, me too. I'm glad to be on here.
I guess I'm going to jump in because I don't know an awful lot about architecture. So I'll say, did you always know that's what you wanted to do? Like, how did you your interest first spike? Was it like something from a child, or how did it come about?
I would actually say my experience, it was probably, I always thought maybe I would be more of a structural engineer initially. As a kid, I was an 80s kid, so I loved Transformers, G.I. Joe, all that, but I always found myself drawing up forts and building forts. Loved Legos, of course. As well, I think my favorite Lego set was there was a Lego castle that actually my sister got as a Christmas gift one year, but I kind of took it from her and built it and everything. But that was kind of the initial if you want to go back, that's probably where it got sparked. But I will say probably what really did it for me was a trip to see Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water I think I was maybe 15 years old. My dad took us to see that, and it was the American, like the iconic American home, and that it was like built over water. Oh, there you go.
Oh wow.
Yeah, John.
There's a Lego set. There's a Lego version of Falling Water.
Yeah, that is the one Lego set. I have a rule about Lego architecture sets. I only get the ones that I've been to. So if right off camera, I have the Seattle Space Needle, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So I've seen those in person, so I can buy that one. But that is the only set I don't have that I have seen in person. And maybe I
have this one too.
Yeah.
Which I have been to see this.
Yes. Yeah.
Is this from your architecture days as well?
Well, those are all the Lego.
They came out years later. Like they came out recently. They were just I got them as like gifts. Like there was an easy gift to give me like for Christmas because it was something I would play with as an adult. And
I was could you grab the Falling Water again? Falling Water,
yeah, here.
Yeah. So Stephanie, are you familiar with Falling Water?
No, I'm not actually. I was just saying that to John.
So the house is actually built over a waterfall.
So this year?
That's so awesome.
Yeah, and there's actually a stream that goes through the house. Like if you go into the lower levels, the water, you're in the basement or whatever, and the water's going through. So as a 15-year-old kid seeing this, not like at the time, did not know what it, was, dad's taking us to see a house. Okay, great. But I loved it. Like every minute of being there, I thought it was the coolest thing. And that's really what kind of triggered it. Then going into my college years of wanting to do architecture. But again, I thought I was really good at science and math and things like that. And so I actually, John, I don't know if I ever told you this. I applied to Penn State, was another school I applied to, and I really wanted to go there. But got offered like an associate's degree. It's like a 2-year degree at a branch campus, not their main campus.
Yeah, that's how they Because I got the same thing because I applied to Penn State too. And
Yeah.
like the whole idea is like you can get all your core classes done at one of the other campuses. And then if your grades are good enough,
Yeah.
we'll matriculate you into the program.
Yeah. But then I obviously got accepted to the school we went to in Philly. And, but that was for all 5 years. It was
Mhm.
like, it was much simpler. Plus I was like, do I go to the middle of nowhere, which Penn State really is? There's nothing, it's in the
There's
mountains.
nothing there.
Which is kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of weird about studying architecture,
Yeah.
like nowhere near a city or anything, so yeah, so obviously I went to Philadelphia, but I was super nervous going into school because I look at the curriculum and it's design classes, understood, but I was really nervous about taking, and John, I think you were in my class, the figure drawing class.
Yeah.
First semester. Like I never took art classes or anything like that. I was like, I don't know how I'm just going to do horrible at this. And I wouldn't say I was like, I was great at it, but at the same time, it was a talent I never knew I had.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
So it was something that was definitely,
And we had to do 2 semesters of that, right? There was drawing 1 and 2 we had to complete.
yeah, the
And it was
first one was
and you had to get
general.
like the big sketchbooks, and you go into the drawing studio, and it was like an 8 in the morning class, and we had to like
Yeah.
draw and like. But then there were times where you could take your smaller sketchbook and go into like some of the old buildings on campus and just sketch details of like
Oh yeah.
banisters and windowsills, and like
Yeah.
really get into some of the like learning some of the details of like specific building pieces, which I had never done that before. I was an art student in high school, so that was
Yeah.
kind of the thing I already knew. It was the design
Yeah.
side. I didn't like that's
Yeah.
where I had to train my brain.
Yeah, because I think the first semester was more general because we had like fashion design students, graphic designers,
Mhm.
so it was like all different majors were in a class. And I remember we did like, a self-portrait, there was figure drawing with models who came in and things like that. And then, yeah, the second semester I think was more specific to your major. If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And like we'd sit, and that was a really cool thing about our college. They had all those like old buildings, like the old mansions and things like the Grace Kelly Mansion, which
Yeah.
was like became the financial aid office, was like on our campus. So you got to go and do these very intricate types of details. So yeah, that's kind of where it came to be wanting to be an architect initially.
It's very cool. I was going to ask, so, and again, please excuse my naivety, if I should know this, but obviously when you design a building, it's kind of a mix between an arty side of it and the aesthetics and like a mathematical side of it as well. So how do you kind of approach that? Because for me as a creative and anyone else who might be listening, I just want to see what it looks like and have it like a bit wild and a bit crazy, but of course you've got to think of the logistics of it and the weight of it. And I think it was on a TV program called How I Met Your Mother, and Barney, no, not Barney, the other one, Ted, was an architect, and he said, oh, what if I forget the books? Because there's a famous architect who built this really grand library, but he forgot to account for the weight of the books, and then the building wasn't safe. So how do you kind of approach that, like bringing the arty side into it, but then still allowing for this the sensible mathematical
so
side?
I think like, so when I get somebody who approaches me and they want to design it, we want a new house, we want to make a new restaurant, whatever it may be, it'll probably be more let's say the artsy stuff first, because we're looking at general kind of concepts from them. How, like, what do you want out of your home? How do you want your home to feel? How do you want the sunlight to interact? Like kind of big picture things. We're looking at that. But then as the project progresses, it gets to be more technical, because of it. Like I use a structural engineer, a heating engineer, electrical engineer, professionals like that on part of my project, but they're not involved usually initially. They get more involved later on, when we have to have, there's the overall kind of design drawings, but then you have your drawings that you have to get approvals from the local jurisdiction. So they always want to first get an approval of what you want to do. So that'll be, you know, like land issues, like how big the house can be, how big the building can be, how far is it off of the road or off of the side property lines. So, you know,
Yeah.
so kind of getting that down. But once you have like, hey, this is what we want to make, then you have to figure out how to make it. So that's another level of drawings. And that's where the engineers get involved. I mean, there's an engineer also involved in the previous one, but more of that technical stuff. The, you know, hey, what size beams do we need to make this span of a floor, or make the roof the way it needs to look, or whatever, you know, whatever else it may be, or comfort levels of the heating and air conditioning, stuff like that. So it gets more and more technical as you go.
So Rich,
Okay.
I'm a big advocate of constraints lead to creativity. And when you think about architecture, like you have constraints of physics and space and height and things that, you know, things weigh something. If you have wind shear, like you got to deal with that. Like, so do you find that like that's where the creativity comes in? You have the initial concept, and now you got to make the thing a functioning structure.
Yeah.
Like that's where you start. Is that where like the rubber meets the road between, you know, like an average architect and a great architect? Is that where you start to see that separation?
Yeah. And it's funny because I had in my earlier years in my career, there was an architect I was working under who, she said to me, she goes, "Oh, architecture is just a game of inches." And it's so true, because where things like get really difficult are in spaces like a bathroom or a kitchen, which you might not think like it's there, but like, especially let's think of a bathroom in a commercial project. You have to design bathrooms to be handicap accessible, so they
Yeah.
need to be a certain size. And somebody who, you know, like I've had clients come to me, oh, and they'll say to me, "Oh, we already sketched it out. We've already figured it out." And I get a sketch of, let's say, a restaurant, right? And I'm like, "Well, you don't have any handicap bathrooms." You know, so the bathrooms, like everything looks great to them, but they have this really tiny bathroom. Like, well, your bathroom needs to be 4 times bigger, right? So how do we
Yeah.
make, let's say if you had a restaurant that wanted to seat 100 people, now I take, you know, all this space out for the bathroom. Oh, well, no, actually your kitchen needs to be bigger too, because it's a commercial kitchen. You need space to move around because you have 20 employees, whatever it may be. You know, those things that are like kind of in the back that people don't really necessarily think about, you know, start taking up space, but you still want to have 100 people in this restaurant. Okay, well, how do you do that? I can actually give a really great example of a specific project. It was for a hair salon that I did.
Okay.
It was actually a men's hair salon, and really great looking space. John, is that actually in Philly? I don't know if you know of the Ethos GSFM.
No,
Okay, so
I don't
really,
really frequent hair salons. I don't know if you noticed.
oh yeah. They do like facials and things like that. Anyway, yeah. Maybe anyway, but yeah, so they're kind of on North Broad Street. But anyway, they is actually a friend of mine. He actually worked for an architecture firm I worked for years ago, back before 2008, and everybody got laid off. We both got laid off around the same time. I ended up starting my own company. He had this dream of doing a high-end men's hair salon. So he got to the point where, I will say GSFM stands for Grooming Station for Men. So he first developed a mobile grooming station, like a mobile barber station that he could take to events. So he would go to a event for like a fashion event or something. He'd set it up there. So that's how he started his business. But then he came into, got to the point where he had a level of success where he actually has his own facility he wants to build. So he comes to me, and he has a background. I think he's more of an interior designer, but he has a background in the industry, right? He gives me a full layout, which is 10 times better than somebody who doesn't have any experience with it, you know, so it's something to work with. But he says to me, he's like, I can't figure out, he's like, I want to provide, this is how I want the space to be for 6 barber stations. He wanted to have a lounge and a reception area. He wanted those things in the front that everybody sees, but he's like, but I really want to provide a break room for my employees. And I needed to have an area for laundry, so they can wash the towels and things like that. And he had a few other things for, like, they want a liquor cabinet, and because it's a really nice thing, and you go in and they're like, okay, what do you want to do for your haircut? Also, what drink would you like to have while we provide you? Would you like a whiskey or a bourbon or whatever, things like that. So he wanted all these things, but he couldn't figure out a way to do it. So I went in, looked at it, and actually one of the things I do for a process is, and you can see right there in that box, is a 3D scanner. So when I take measurements of my spaces, I don't use a tape measure and clipboard anymore. I have a camera that scans the whole space, captures all the stuff. It takes all the pictures for me too, which is
wow.
If John, I don't know, how many times you've had to survey an existing space, but a typical problem that would happen is you try to take as many pictures as you can to capture it all. So when you get back into the office and start drawing it up, there's times where there's like little gaps, right? So the 3D scanner captures all that stuff and prevents those gaps and prevents you from having to go back. So in this case, I use the scanner, I scan the space, and as I draw it up, I figured out that I told my client, his name is also John, but I go, John, you actually have just enough space to do a second floor in the back if you want to go with it. I'm like, it's super tight, but you have, like, if we need 14 feet, you got 14 feet 2 inches, whatever, it's like you had just enough space. So he goes, great. So I was able to figure out a mezzanine in the back, and it has a break room up there. And actually, I even figured out a way to have a small office for him to use as his own private office. So, and the project has been built and everything. And I go in there one day to get a haircut, and then also like, hey, how you liking the space and all that. And he goes, let me tell you, I'm so happy with the front. It's exactly what I wanted. He's like, but my favorite part is the break room in the office. And he's like, I couldn't figure that out. And it was just like, and I was like, well, great. I appreciate that. And he keeps on talking about it all the time, but it was those little, like I said, it was like, we had just enough space, and we were able to figure that out. And to be quite honest, I would have never figured that out without that 3D scanner as well.
It sounds very high tech and very fancy and posh, and sounds nice.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I've been in business for 15 years, and it's something that's improved my process like 1,000 times. Everything's more accurate, and actually I can gather data and draw it up accurately in a much shorter amount of time now too.
So Rich, talk me through that, just like that process for that project. Like, was his original game plan to keep everything on the first floor, and when you scanned it out, you're like, you're going to run out of space too quickly, but you have space to go upstairs? Like, is that how did you map that out?
Yeah, the second floor thing became, let's just call it a project discovery. Is that, yeah, he had the plan that he gave me had like, here's a back of area. He's like, these are the things I want, but I just don't have enough space. Is there a way to figure it out? Half of the space was a handicap bathroom. Okay. And it needed to be that, but everything else was like, he's like, I don't, like I was saying earlier, he's like, I don't know how I can provide this. And then as I looked at it, I was like, hey, you can keep your front of the space as is. I figured out how to make a stair work to go up to this mezzanine. And this, it's not the biggest of break rooms. It's not the biggest of an office, but hey, here it is. This is what for you to have what you want. So it
solved his solution. So just real quick, just for Steph and for anybody watching from outside of the US. So in the US, our building codes, we have the American Disabilities Act was a seminal set of codes that especially for commercial construction, you need to have accessibility for wheelchairs and things like that. So you have to figure out how to get a ramp into these buildings or something level. So you can't have stairs. And as Rich said, bathrooms were always you need to be able to, and there's actually maps. It's not just they need to be able to navigate a wheelchair into the bathroom and into the stall in a comfortable way. So that it's not just a larger bathroom stall. it's the getting in through the door and getting around and
Yeah,
turning
yeah.
around and
You
getting
had to
set
have
up. Like
certain-
that was something like we get, like I remember like my second year studio in Drexel, we were already putting ADA into the building because they were just like, this is a requirement. Like you have to be able to
Mhm.
accommodate this.
Yeah, you need like you need like, so for example, you need 12, like if you're on the side of the door when you're pushing the door in, where the doorknob is, you need to have 12 inches clear. But on the other side where you're pulling the door to open it, you need 18 inches. So you need there's all kinds of clearances, and there's different rules for, like, if you can overlap some of those, and it's the reason why code books are 1,000 pages long, all kinds of stuff. So, and I will say that is another thing, is there's a lot of information when it comes to codes and all that. And what I like to tell my clients is, I don't know all the codes like on the back of my hand, but I know where to look,
Yeah.
so that's
And I was going to ask, well, it's kind of a 2-in-1 question, really. Do you have like a set style, like that's your like signature thing that you do? And has anyone ever come, like a client ever come to you and wanted things so like outrageously wild? You're like, oh God, how am I going to do this?
in terms of style, I would say over the years, my style has become my client's style.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have like it's not like a modern or like, name any type of
The
architectural
different schools
style.
of thought. Yeah.
That's what I do, like, so it's probably more, as a practicing architect, it has to there has to be a certain level of your style is your client's style. And sometimes, go to my website, you'll see projects that I've done. And, I've had people call, hey, I went to your website and I saw the hair salon, right? I really liked what that looked like. So, I'd like something like that,
Yeah.
that type of thing. And what was the second part of your question?
And have you ever had like a client come to you wanting something really outrageous and wild, and you're like, God, how am I going to do that? Like, I don't even know.
I would say one that comes to mind is somebody who wanted to have their business in their house. And
Okay.
it was a process that they were hoping that would only last about 4 to 6 months. And it took 1.5 years to get it approved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And is that because it was an unusual kind of space, or is that because of health and safety reasons, because it's attached to a residential, or?
A number of reasons. Part of it was what the client wanted to do. There was a way to, basically, they had a house renovation, and then they had a renovation related to their business. And I had figured out a way to do the house renovation, and then in a way slide the business under it. It wasn't technically slide the business under it, but you could have done the house as a separate project and then had the business renovation at a different time, but he wanted it all together. So that was number one of why it took so long. He could have done the house in 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
But because he had his business there were other things where, like, we had to make a parking spaces in his front yard for his business, which typically is just a driveway, but he had a business. So going back to handicap, he had to have a handicap parking spot in his front yard, which is much bigger than
Right.
Because now it's commercial. Like now
Yes.
it's,
Yeah.
now, did you have any problems? Like, because a lot of times, like in residential neighborhoods too, then you need a zoning variance to like allow it to be commercial, because the other neighbors might like not want a commercial.
Yeah, and that's what we had to do here.
Okay.
And we had to go a number of times. We went, I think, 2 or 3 times to the town to get the approval. And, there was an initial, there was comments that the town had. So we had to come back to a later meeting, do that. And every time you do that, it's a public meeting. So then any neighbors can come. So neighbors can come and say, like, for example, this area where this house was, there was a huge commercial area nearby. It was like almost right on the edge of the neighborhood. So there was a number of neighbors who were concerned that well, if you approve this business, that means more and more businesses are going to come into our neighborhood. And this was,
Okay.
so they didn't like that idea. So it was one of those things where it got approved, like 5 people from the board approved, 4 people did not approve it. It was very close. But it went through. I can also I move on to a different project as I'm speaking. I thought of a different one in terms of crazy ideas. I had a very interesting project where the last job I had in 2008, when I worked for a bigger architect, I worked for a firm who were known to do casinos. So this was a $2.5 billion casino project I was working on that was down the road from me here in Atlantic City. And project was built, and I mean, we could spend hours talking about some of the crazy stuff I dealt with in that. But a few years later, the company went bankrupt and the building closed. So I ended up, a guy came in, bought it out of bankruptcy, and the guy hired me. And I'm not going to give him the real name, but let's just call him Willy Wonka. Because it was a very Willy Wonka type experience in terms of, it was very mysterious to the public about what was going on inside. Because this client was promising the world to the public, was saying, because it was a building that was complete. So the way he kind of brought the project to the public was, hey, we're going to be open in like 2 days, but meanwhile, I'm meeting with him and I'm like, you're not going to open in 2 days. There's all kinds of stuff. And I mean, I don't want to get too much into it because, especially, maybe this might get me in trouble if I say too much, but he ended up selling it. He never did anything with it really. And he ended up selling it to a new group, and now they have it open. But there were a number of the relationship I had with this particular client was, he would just kind of come up with ideas. We had 2 million square feet of space that were never even built in this building. I mean, the hotel tower had, let's say, 1,000 hotel rooms, but they only built like 250 of them. Like, you would see, it was a glass tower. You could drive up to it at night and you could see the whole middle of it you could see through it because there was nothing built. You could, the lower floors had some lights on because the hotel rooms, the upper floors had, they did some of the nicer ones. The whole middle of it was completely dark, and you could just, and you could see through it, like, if you're approaching it. So, he would, a typical day with him was, first off, I never had a scheduled meeting with the guy. He would just like call me up. That morning. He would call me up and he's flying into town. He knew I drove by the airport. So he'd ask me to pick him up from the airport, come down, and he'd be like, he'd have these ideas. And some of them would be normal ones. Oh, we want to put a restaurant here. We want to do a movie theater. But then it got into some crazier ideas of, one was take 2 levels of the parking garage and make it into a go-kart track, which was kind of crazy. But he would pay I had a meeting. He paid for some Formula 1 racer and another guy who specialized in go-kart tracks they were from England. He flew them in from England.
Interesting.
And and they were, the best of the best, in terms of this. And they had, we walked to the parking garage and they were like, yeah, these areas we could make a go-kart track, So, but they never moved forward with it. He wanted to put a water park in a existing atrium that had stairs and escalators, like remove them all, because it was like a 6-story space. And then the best one was he wanted to do a gun range, but you can't do a gun range. Gun range in casinos is not a good mix. So
I was going to say this, like, so the cars and the gun range and the swimming pool was in a casino.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, God,
now
that's so extravagant.
Well, part of it, just in his defense, from a standpoint, from a business standpoint. So one of the things to know about like Atlantic City, and this is where those casinos are. So there was a time where it was Vegas and Atlantic City. Those are the places you could gamble. So those casinos could make money, but then gambling started to become legal in more states. So like there's now casinos like around here. And so Atlantic City started to lose its draw, like why people would go down. You went down there because it was the only place you could go do it. Now there's two within 2 miles of where I'm sitting right now. So it's like, okay, well, I don't need to drive down to Atlantic City.
Yeah, there's 2 in Philadelphia. Yeah.
So like it's like one of those things. And so people in Atlantic City started to say, we need other stuff to like really make it a destination place. Because it's like Vegas is not just the casinos. Vegas is an entire all-encompassing experience. So I could see where he's reaching for, trying to make it like, okay, how do I integrate family trips to this? So water park, go-kart, like it becomes a thing where you're not going down there to gamble, you're going there to experience something grand. And so I could totally see that being the motivation behind it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of enthusiasm with a little bit of like, not like a fully, baked idea, but like I could totally see that, why that would be somebody's motivation, because the gambling is no longer a draw by itself. You don't have to drive down there to do it.
Well, and the funny thing is you fast forward to today, the building next door to it that was a casino that closed has been reopened, and they don't have a casino in there anymore. They still have a hotel component, but they made their casino floor an arcade, and half of the floor is an arcade, half of the floor is actually an indoor go-kart track now. And they just opened, they built an addition to it, and it's an indoor outdoor water park.
Oh, so it did kind of come into fruition then.
Yeah, it just happened to be
that guy.
Not that building, but the building next door.
Yeah.
But so he said it's going to be open in 2 days. So what happened in those 2 days? Did like people rock up on those, like after those 2 days, and like expect it to be open? Then he was like, no, sorry. Like, how did that go down?
No, I think it more was about him just saying things to get attention. To be quite honest. Yeah, no, because there was one day he had a news conference and he was making those promises, and I was sitting inside and the lights weren't on. The fire alarm systems were malfunctioning. Like the strobes were, I'm waiting to have a meeting with him in a dark casino floor with the fire alarm strobe lights just going on and off. Like,
God.
Yeah, because I didn't know that at the time. I had the meeting with him, and I go home and I see him on the news saying that. I was like, that's not happening.
You know what, like, and you see this, but it's silly when it doesn't come true. But if you look at like some of the hero stories of like American innovators, like Steve Jobs, this was his whole thing. We're going to do this, and his whole team would say, "You're insane," and he would just force them into believing it until they actually made it happen. And that's like that. There's like a mythology around that thought process that if I say it with enough of my chest, like, and I just say it, people will make this happen because that's what we do. And it's a wild.
I quite like that. I quite like that. I'm like, maybe I should do that to myself.
Well, and I'll say this is, and that's where, to go back to creativity, there's creativity of process. So like some of the crazy things I've been presented to, like, so I'll go back to this same building, this same casino building when I worked as an employee, and there was like ridiculous deadlines given to the firm I worked for, which then translated down to ridiculous deadlines given to employees. So I have like one experience where I was working a project architect for this, where I was working on all the roofing and waterproofing for the entire facility. And I had to produce drawings for a meeting one time to say, we have this type of roofing in this area, this type of waterproofing in another area, there's pools here, and then so we have stuff there, so it was supposed to be a diagram of all the different levels, and then using different colors will indicate what type of material is being used where. So I had it was like one of these things where like, hey, we had the meetings tomorrow, right? So we have to, can you do it wasn't, can you do the drawings for us for tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock for us to pick up and take down? Like, you have to get this done for us for tomorrow. So I had a situation where I was like, okay, I have kids. Even at the time I had just my one kid. He was probably like maybe 2 years old at the time. And so I went home, and my wife is a dance instructor. So my wife has a dance, actually has it's right in this building behind that door is my wife's ballet school.
Okay.
Yeah. So she had not this school at the time. She owned a different school. So I had to get home anyway, take care of the baby. And actually maybe even at that time I was watching the front desk at the dance school. At the early days, it was just
Busy.
a family affair. Yeah. So I went home, but then I was like, hey, I got to come back early to finish these drawings. So I come back. I actually, went into the office at 3, 4 in the morning, whatever time it was. I get there, I finish the drawings, and I'm doing the drawings again in the computer. So I go to print them. Well, the printer doesn't work. But I have another hour, let's say, until my boss or whoever, manager or whatever, is coming in to pick up these drawings and go to this meeting. I have to get it done. So I made a decision. I actually I took the drawings, printed them out black and white, and I took colored markers and I colored everything in by hand and had everything done and complete and ready for them to pick up.
Wow.
So I hand it to them, and then the senior project manager, who's taking the drawings, sees them by hand, and just gives me like, I can't believe you did this. This looks unprofessional, blah, blah. And I kind of explained the scenario and the situation. So, but he ended up taking them. And then fast forward to later on in the day, he comes back from the meeting, doesn't say anything to me. But then eventually I go up to him like, hey, how did that meeting go with the drawings? He goes, well, what was wrong with the drawings? And I go, well, you yelled at me because they were done by hand and they didn't look professional or whatever. He goes, oh no, it was everything was understood clearly and it was perfect. So it was just like, again, it was like one of those things where I was like, here's a problem. I can't print out what I need to print out.
You solved it.
Yeah. What's the solution I can do? Because I only have 45 minutes, an hour, whatever time it is. And that's the other thing. Like when it comes to deadlines, sometimes you apply that pressure, you can become that diamond.
That's really cool way of doing it. I actually think that's ingenious. When you said that just then about handing, I was like, wow, that's a lot of work to do in 1 hour. So hats off to you.
So
he was a bit of an ask for having a go at you though. I was going to ask, do you know like lawyers have to pass a bar test? Do you guys have to pass something similar?
Yes.
Yeah, he did. I never went that route, but he did.
Yeah. So and actually,
it's optional, is it?
It's not.
Well, I'm not a practicing architect, so I have a degree in architecture, but I never went into the field. I never practiced architecture. To practice architecture, you eventually have to do the licensing exams, and there's 6.
I think currently there's, I believe it's 5 or 6 now. When I did it, so I passed my exam, I think in I'm going to say 2006, and then there was 9 tests you had to take. So, but you also have to qualify to take the test. So first qualification is you get a degree from a university. Then after that, you have to work a certain amount of hours in the profession, which essentially equals about 3 years worth of work. Then you're eligible to take the test. And then, you take them.
That seems a bit backwards though, because if you've already got 3 years under your belt working in the industry, then surely you're able and capable. And
you're working as an underling under a licensed practitioner, so that you're learning the ropes, and now you got to go prove you can do it on your own.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But the joke, I don't know, like the joke. I remember because the joke, whenever you talk to, like when I was in architecture school, you talk about like what the process is going to be. Once I finish this, then it's going to be this and that. But like when I was going just back to school was with a financial, that's when Rich and everybody else I knew had gotten laid off, and that's why I never ended up going into the field. It was just the timing didn't work out for me. But the joke used to be, it's like, so it's a longer degree. It's at least 3 years working for somebody, and then it's a number of exams depending on when you do it, and depending on the state. Like in California, there's an extra exam just for earthquakes. Like they focus on that, and people are like, "Oh my god, like that's a lot. That's like more than what a doctor goes through." And it's like, and the joke was, well, when the doctor messes up, one person dies, and because when an architect messes up, like it's the entire building and everybody
catastrophic. Yeah.
So and everything's centered. it centers around health and safety of,
Yeah.
you know, and ultimately, I wouldn't say like the architect's the only one who is responsible if something goes wrong, because
Yeah,
when
no,
something
I'm
goes
just
wrong, it becomes a whole other process. And
for legal purposes, we have to say there's more people involved.
yeah. Well, and it's funny because I've gotten sued once in my career, and it was because of a structural engineer undersized some beams on my project.
Oh, wow.
And actually the way it ended up working, the legal system was he was sued by my client, but then didn't have the insurance or something to pay for whatever that settlement cost was. So he did what's called, he made everybody an additional defendant. So I was an additional defendant. The structural engineer who came in to fix the problem was one. The builder was one. Like, so there was all these parties that were done. And then the legal process actually just kind of like took people out that weren't responsible. So at the end of the day, the responsible parties ended up being myself, the old structural engineer, and the new structural engineer. And then,
Wow.
you know, and we kind of split it 3 ways, and that's why you have insurance and all that different stuff too, because it was
But you hadn't, I don't understand how that falls into you, because you hadn't ordered him to get the things that were too small, right? You'd ordered the correct,
right. Yes.
told him the correct instructions.
Yeah. So yeah,
how does that...
it's just
the-
a legal.
It's
Yeah.
The American legal system is very much, it could be a catch-all. Like it could just be, because I know attorneys, and it's like they could go to a deposition and there could be 100 attorneys in there for one issue, because the product that they are representing might get named, and it's just like, and then they sort it out. And a lot of times the way they sort it out is, what's the least amount of effort to figure this out? And sometimes people have to pay things that they weren't directly responsible for, because it just made everything else easier for them.
Yeah. And I also learned the importance of having a good insurance policy.
Yeah, I bet.
I ended up paying, like, my deductible or whatever you have to pay when you have to use insurance was like $2,500, you know, but
Yeah.
I know, you know, the other structural engineer, his was like 4 times more than mine was, you know, so he had to pay that out of pocket, you know. And
I hope people had fired him after that, though. Christ.
I never
I'd be
used
like,
that guy. No, I never used that guy after that. Was
no, God.
yeah. So it you know, it's unfortunate, but I mean, it settled itself, and you know,
Yeah.
you know, learn from it type thing. So
Rich, I had a oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go on, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just
I'll
going to
ask you
totally
that
switch
after.
topics because something popped into my head, but like, because I wanted to get back into like the creative stuff. I had a professor who used to say, and he would say this all the time. He's like, I firmly believe that I got one great building in me. I just haven't made it yet. Like no matter what else he designed, he's like, I don't have that signature building yet. Like, do you feel like you've created your great building, or do you feel like you still got one great building left in you?
no, I definitely, yeah, no, I feel that. And it's funny because Stephanie asked a question earlier about, like, you know, style and all that. And I've always thought about like going back to a specific like building type. Like, I've done a number of beach houses, right?
Nice.
But I've always done them for clients. And sometimes the, you know, the style of that isn't necessarily what I would want, or, you know, the 9-bedroom beach house doesn't fit what my family would be as a beach house. So
Yeah.
I've always thought about like going back and like doing one, you know, kind of for myself type thing, and doing it in different styles. So, you know, I know that, like, you know, while I have some great ones, you know, that there could be better ones in me. Because, well, and sometimes what can get frustrating in this industry is like, I can design something and draw it all up, but then I have to hand those drawings off to a builder. And I've had it's happened to me a number of times where, unfortunately, they'll make changes. The builder and the client will make changes without my knowledge. You know, and you know, let's
But
say
they're
I've done
not
100.
qualified to do that, though, are they?
not really. I mean, I guess it depends what the situation, because sometimes the changes might be like, they didn't like, let's keep it on a residential thing and say they didn't like where the closet was in the bedroom, so they put it on the other wall,
Right. Okay.
but then there can be other ones where, like, I know of a apartment building I did in Philadelphia, and I don't want anything to, like, I don't want people to know that I was involved on that project, because the whole outside of the building looks completely different than what I designed it as, and that was, so just to maybe to help explain, Stephanie, how that particular project, how that would work is it was all materials. So it didn't change the structure of the building. It's just that, like, if we had metal panels at this one spot, they made it into wood panels, or, it was just kind of swapping out materials, and then kind of taking, like, the windows are all in the same spot, but they just made them different materials than what I wanted it to be. So,
okay. That's annoying, I bet, for you.
Yeah. So, and I even have, like, one, actually, to go back to the closet thing, is I had a client for a house that was built like 2 years ago, and they have some family issues. The husband had passed away, unfortunately. The wife is having some health issues, so her brother is gonna essentially take over the house at some point. And he didn't like how it was a bedroom addition on this house, and he's like, he didn't like where the closet was. And in the conversation, I actually answered the phone, and it's this guy yelling at me, like, right away, like, why is the bathroom like this, and why is the closet here, and blah blah blah. Well, through the conversation, come to find out that it's not where I put the closet. Where they put the closet, the builder did. It wasn't where I designed it. It was on the other side. It actually took away, like, we had one wall where it was a perfect place to put the bed, because then if you're laying in bed, you would see the bay. It was on the bay side of a shore town, so you could see the sunset. Like, it was perfectly, like, where the wind lined up with the window and all this. Well, they put a closet on there, and now there's no wall to put, like, a bed for two people. There's, like, no walls to put a bed, anymore, because there was doors and things like that. So, and it was a lot of money put into it, and it was like, well, no, that was the builder, that wasn't me.
I think that's a piece. Okay.
How did they even have access to you? Like, in England, like, I wouldn't have a clue who the architect was. It would be just through the people who were selling the house. So,
well,
or the builders, or
so, like, if you look at here, let me see. I have drawings right here. So here's a set of drawings. Maybe I should close, but what's important is right here is this information. It's actually back upside down, but so right here, there you go, is all my contact information.
Right.
On any drawing. So anybody, if you have a set of my drawings that are like approval drawings like that, you have my contact information. So
right. Okay. I see.
So
sorry, go on, John.
No, I was going to say, like, I think that, and Rich hit on an important point, and I think that this is the difference between, like, when you think about, like, structure, like building, and the design of architecture, like the design side of the brain, is that ultimately the architecture is a human experience. And I was going to, when you talked about the closet being on the wrong side, or I was going to ask you, like, what the thought process was, because there isn't a wrong side. It's like, when it goes here because this is how you're going to experience this room, and so therefore this has to go here because it's the only way it makes sense. Like, it's like, there's certain things that I know when, like, I'm in my kitchen, right? There is a triangle of the sink and the fridge and the stove. Like, there's a certain way that we as humans operate, and if you don't have it laid out like that, it feels awkward, and it does. So there's certain things that are human experience. You say, this is how I want to experience the space. So of course the closet has to go on this wall because you want to experience the bay from the bed, and you have to be here. And those are like those micro decisions that I find fascinating, because every one of those things is somebody walking through a space, and now how are they going to feel? Like, what are they going to feel through
Yeah.
that?
Yeah,
So
and
it's
it's
like,
because
it's math. It's, we were talking before, it's math, art, but architecture is so much psychology because it's you're tapping into somebody's emotion as they walk into a space. Like,
yeah,
you put a grand stair because you want to generate awe. You make the room small because you want them to feel cozy. Like, you make these decisions to really, you draw out an emotion from a person.
yeah, and that's another reason why, like, I think, like, earlier, one of the first questions I'll ask, like, a potential client is like, well, how do you want this space to make you feel? It's like,
That's a really nice question.
yeah,
Like home, right? If it's residential,
yeah,
like a hug.
yeah. So actually, I don't. That my actual words are, "What are your hopes and dreams?"
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
because I could totally see that being like I want a large family. I want this place to be a lively. Okay, you're going to host family events with 20, 30 people. We're going to make this a grand space. We're going to make the kitchen like this all-star that's going to then flow out, because it doesn't matter. Like, my mom used to have, when I was growing up, a little metal plaque in the kitchen, and it was like one of those, like, it was like I think it was like meant for pots. It was like an iron griddle thing, but it had a saying on it, and it said, "No matter where I serve my guests, they always prefer the kitchen best." And it's one of those things. If you ever go to a dinner party, everybody eventually like hangs around the kitchen, no matter.
yeah,
It doesn't matter how big or small it is. Like, that's how people hang out. So if you're somebody who's going to host parties, well, we need to make the kitchen something that's flexible for that. Like, it's like, that's part of their story.
yeah,
My house is literally like that. So my house is my kitchen is my biggest room in the whole house, and I've got like 22 members of family coming over on Saturday, just because we haven't seen each other in ages. But yeah, there's like, we've got the kitchen area where we cook, and then we've got like a little sofa area, and then we've got at the back like a dining bit with a table and chairs and stuff. And we've got a little breakfast bar at the front as well. But everyone will stay in here. No one will go in any other parts of the house. But so
Yeah.
you're exactly right there.
yeah,
Yeah, because like that could, and if that's who you, if that's the life you want to have, there's ways to design that. I love that, like the hopes and dreams, because there's going to be people who like, I let's say I'm an introvert and I need a space where I can recharge and I can do. Okay, that's a much more intimate space. Like, you don't want to be in an open floor plan if you just want to like quiet from everything else. If you need time to separate, and yeah, I love that. Like, to tap into the emotion that directly.
yeah. No, and I could think of, like, when we were talking about kitchens, I had a client once who, like, they had this huge addition. Like, we literally took the roof off of the house and built a second floor. And,
Wow.
they wanted to have all these different things, additional bedrooms, was growing family, things like that. But almost the majority of the discussion centered around the kitchen counter and island, and how our big, the family of 22 are going to come over. And I want to make sure that while I'm cooking, everybody can stand around there or sit around there and
That's exactly it.
be comfortable, and also be able to, she can stand in the kitchen and see everybody, like in almost like in the entire house.
Yeah.
So we came up with some idea. Actually, I have a bridge between bedrooms on the second floor that can kind of help that, like, by even like looking upstairs, so
That's very cool.
yeah.
So I'm just conscious of time. So where can people find you? If people want to know about you, work for you, want to see some of your work, where can we find you?
Sure. The well, like right behind my head here, I'm always pointing the wrong. So the name of my company is Dauntless Design Collaborative, and
Very
the
cool.
website is dauntlessdc.com for Design Collaborative. And most of everything else is just right here on the screen. It can be found, like Instagram, I believe, is Rich the Architect. I have a Facebook page similar. Well, I have Rich the Architect Facebook page. I have a podcast called Rich the Architect, where it's just kind of me talking about business stuff. Sometimes I have guests on, but a lot of times it's just me talking. For example, right now I'm doing a series where I'm talking about my firm principles. So it's like the 8 principles that I have that I use on a day-to-day basis to live by.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
So for
Like to
example,
live the life to the fullest type thing.
Yeah, but it's how I can produce my best work.
Well, it's like,
Ah,
it's kind of like, I remember a professor, like, not having eight, but like, I'm sure you've run into this with design, and I took this to heart from everything I've done since. It's like, he's like, you need a something to hang all of these decisions on. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes,
Yeah.
so when I meet with a client, I tell them, I'm gonna make 1,000,000 decisions on this, and about 1,000 of them I'm gonna include you in on, but know that all of them are branched off this idea. And as long as we're all bouncing off this principle, we're all gonna make the right decisions. And like, that's a core tenet of my process. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's how we're gonna work. And that was something I thought, okay, yeah, because I was making decisions, but there was no core belief that I was tying it back to.
Right.
And I
Right.
had to
Yeah.
do that for every project.
Yeah. So just to give an example, my first principle is find a way. And then all of my other 7 are ways I find a way. So
oh, that's very cool.
number 2 is simplify the complex. So you break everything into digestible parts.
Mhm.
You know, so yeah, so but yeah, that's pretty much where I can be. Yeah, Rich the Architect again, Instagram, TikTok, I'm starting to get back into a little bit.
Really?
I did it for a while, and I like to use it also for personal hobbies. I do have a background in music as well, so
Dark horse.
what's that?
I said you dark horse. I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
I gotta chat with you. I
Architect,
have
musician.
I want to do I was talking to a music school near me, because I've been wanting to do this for a while. Like on Amazon, you can get these like 12-inch light rods, and I want to do long exposure drummer photography with like a flash at the end. So you get the chaos, and then the flash at the end gets like their face, like it's just that motion. But like
Yeah.
combining the two is like a long exposure with a late flash, and really get that.
Oh,
So
that'd be
maybe
really
I'll
cool.
test it out on you, and like and
Yeah.
we'll see if we could.
We get. I think at this point, my oldest son is a better drummer than I am, so maybe we'll get my and he has the perfect part. He's 19 years old. He's got hair down like halfway down his back. He looks the part. So he might be the one. But yeah, Steph, I've drumming and actually beatboxing is what I've been known for.
Oh wow.
So
Okay. I didn't
I
say
almost
that.
didn't do architecture because of beatboxing.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Wow.
I had a period of time, but I wasn't making any money, so I decided to go back to architecture. But I had some fun in my younger years, and
Yeah.
That's very
with it.
cool.
Yeah. So
Maybe you should start a little sidekick doing that as well.
I mess around with it
This
still.
is retirement plan.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is about maybe 2 years ago, saw a YouTube video of a performer, and let's just say the modern beatboxer is very different than what I was used to 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Actually, one of the best beatboxers in the world is from England.
Oh
His
really?
Yeah, I don't know where in England, but his name is D-Lo. If you can look, like he just played was it Glastonbury, right? The
Yeah,
festival.
yeah, Glastonbury.
Yeah, him and a number. There's French beatboxers, English. They're all kind of like top of the tier these days. It's not Americans, which is kind of a weird
Oh, that
thing.
surprises me actually.
Yeah. No, it in the past 20 years, it really exploded in Europe. And Asia. Actually, Asia is probably maybe even bigger now. There's a group there's different festivals and competitions. So now they do it every 2 years. Swiss Beatbox is one of the main groups, and they have what's called the Grand Beatbox Battle. So
Ah,
yeah,
nice,
so
nice.
D-Lo won that. I'm gonna say I think in 2019, maybe 18. The last time they did was 2021. It was French. The French beatboxers were first and second, and that's just one guy on a mic. They have other things with like loop stations and different categories of like a group performers as well. But yeah, I had seen a video of somebody performing with a loop station, which is just basically you can record, like, so I can I can record that and I'll just loop it. And then you can put something
Okay.
like doom, 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 like the bass line on it, put horns, but whatever you want, added effects, and then you can put effects on it. So I saw somebody doing that online. I think it was Mark Rebier, who's travels the world, I think, and does it, but he does everything kind of top of the head. Like he just
Oh, well.
makes
Oh,
it up as he goes, right? And I saw him, and he plays keyboard and bass and all different instruments. It's really like, it's interesting. I was watching a number of them, of his videos, and I saw that loop station. I was like, what is that? I want that. I want that. So I did some research, found it, ended up buying it, have my own, and started using it. But then it was like learning to play a new instrument. It was like, I mean, to this day, I've had it for about 2-3 years, and I'm still like, I know how to play the rhythm on the guitar, but I don't know how to tune it,
Mhm.
you know, like,
yeah.
but learning it, that's the great thing about today is you can go onto Google or YouTube or whatever and say, how do I do the EQ levels on the
Yeah.
MK1 loop station, blah, blah, well, and that
Yeah,
leads to more videos you see. So then I just went into this rabbit hole of watching the competitions and then just seeing what these guys and girls do now these days. I'm like, I'm not even like, I'm not even gonna try to be like, it's, I equate it to athletics in a way where it's just like, like Michael Jordan, you could talk about Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, but if they played basketball today, probably LeBron James is going to win because he's still an active professional athlete.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not to
Yeah.
say, like, I think John, we have that to debate,
Yeah, that's always going to be
30-year-old
good.
LeBron James.
But even that, when we talk about athletes of today, like the conditioning's different, the training's different, the nutrition's different. Like it's a different game. They
It just
because
gets
they're
better and
doing,
better.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
they're doing. I remember like a guy I worked with, his daughters. He and his wife were both collegiate swimmers, and then
Yeah.
and his 3 daughters were all or the one is 2 of them graduated, one is now in college as a swimmer, and he said, back in my day, it was like, you want to improve your time, get back in the pool and do more laps. He said, now, like, they have like video where they could break down like how their hand is hitting the water on freestyle to get a
Yeah.
better scoop. And he said, the techniques that they can, he said, my daughters are faster than I ever was because they can break down these techniques down to minutia to gain an extra, 100th of a second. And he
Yeah.
said, it's just amazing. It's just
Yeah,
different.
and I mean, there's just so much more information. You put anything. Think about like martial arts or boxing and fighting, like the science behind that, and to
Mhm.
prevent like head injuries or whatever. It just gets better and better. And like to go back to but like to go back to beatboxing, right? So I grew up in the '80s, all that. I really liked it. I mean, we don't have to get into all the stuff about like why I liked it, but there was no, besides seeing the Fat Boys or Dougie Fresh or people you would see like on MTV doing it, everything else was just kind of like you just kind of figured it out yourself. I mean, there was certain techniques that I did
Mhm.
that I heard somebody else doing like a vocal scratching, and then I remember figuring it out by accident one day. Like I was trying to make, I was making a guitar sound. I was like, won't, 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 won't. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, it was like kind of like related to that. I was like, holy crap, I can do do that. But now a lot of, last fall, most of the countries have a championship beatbox competition somewhere. So the American Beatbox Championship was actually in Atlantic City last year. So I went down to it. I didn't go for the whole 3 days, but I went down one day, and I ended up getting to meet some people that I follow online and know as whatever beatbox celebrities or whatever you want to call it. But I talked to some of the current artists, and I told this one artist, I was just like, you guys share so much information. Like I can go, if I want to learn how to do, I mentioned like the beatboxer D-Lo, right? He has his own channel, and he has like how-tos of how he did certain music or certain beat, and that was not 20 years ago. That was never available. and to the point where like I could sit here and I could teach you guys a basic beat just using boots and cats as a term. Boots, you hear that, you've heard that, boots and cats and boots and cats. If you take it if you elongate it, boots cats, right? So you have boots cats, boots cat, boots cat, boots and cats, boots and cats, and boots and cats. So boots cats, boots cats, boots cats, boots cats. So that like they have that, and they actually have like series now where it's like whether it's boots and cats or they may say BTS. They use actual real letters to start, emulating different types of sounds. Like, oh, how do you make a hi-hat sound? Well, you make a T, like a TS.
So,
so there's so much information out there now where that 18-year-old is like, when I was 18 versus them being 18, they are 1,000 times ahead of us, ahead of where,
because they've got the information hand.
Yeah. So, so it's like, I never felt like, I will say when I first started doing it, I was like, oh wait, these young guys, are they better? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, they're just so more, it's just, their starting point is so far ahead of where my starting point was. It's just like, just enjoy it, like, and some of the conversation, I was like, oh, it became like kind of old man conversation a little bit, but, you just kind of like, hey, you guys are great, and here's a few things as an older guy, like, take care of your throat a little bit better than I did. Cause like, I'm almost 50 years old and I'm dealing with, your Adam's apple gets messed up as you get older, that type of thing, so take care of your body better. So
I think that could be applied to everything, to be fair.
What's that?
I said, I think that can be applied to everything about taking care of yourself and your body.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And it's been so insightful as well. But thank you so much for your time and for coming on to chat to us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And maybe we can return the favor. I'd like to pick your brain about photography, because it's always interesting to get, the views of, creativity. Let's just, with your guys' topic on, from other from other professionals.
Well, ours are very different. Mine and John's style are completely different to each other, but
we'll do. We're our photography, but that's why we started this, was because creativity is creativity, but creativity, the creativity is shared. Everything else is different, but we can all learn a little bit from everybody's little processes, because like there's going to be certain things just from this conversation that just the idea, like, so when I do a portrait, it's going to be, simplify the complex is kind of my story, but like what I do is like, I take somebody's hobbies and life and make it into a singular image that tells a story. And part of that is like, when I'm talking about like where it's going to be a physical print, it's going to go in their home somewhere. I talk to them about like, tell me how you want to feel when you hit this room and you look at this thing, and what do you want to feel every day when you see this photo of your family or your kid or this or your pet. And I never even thought about like hopes and dreams, because that's also like a part of that conversation. So like this is where I'm going to incorporate it into how I approach that, because what I'm creating is a very emotion rich product, and it's like really getting into their minds that way. I love the way you approach that. So it's like anything else, we can always borrow and adapt, and that's also like the part of creativity. Creativity is all derivations of things that have come before.
And we have well, I had mentioned with my wife in the with her as the dance school, so like some of our like daily like conversations we have at the dinner table or the breakfast table is just like we can relate. And we both have had businesses now in both of our fields for 15 plus years, and there's so many things that overlap, like that are very similar, and we can benefit both ways from our experiences. So
I'm going to want to talk to her too, because I do dance photography. I got into that like a little bit. A friend of mine is a dance instructor, and I photographed it a bunch, and I love the elegance of dance. And what I end up doing always, because it's me, is I always like juxtapose a dancer with some form of architecture and
Yeah.
like hard structure with fluid elegance and like create that like tension between those two.
Oh,
I don't
she
think I
has
have one.
she actually has a pet peeve because sometimes she's just like can't believe some photos get out there.
Oh yeah, no, I've seen
Uh,
some. And I remember when I first photographed like my friend, um, there were certain things that aesthetically I thought looked good, and she's like, my form is poor. You like you that's you have we
yeah,
have to throw that one out. Like it
we
has to be this, it has to, and so I really started to and that was part of like one of the things I started to learn about the art form of dance and just
yeah
really understanding like what goes into that because that's a number of years of like there's so much technical that goes into that.
yeah we had
Um,
I think just last night we had a talk because she just put an ad out in a advertising magazine, and there was like another dance school in the magazine as well, and she's like, I can't believe they use that picture because their biscuits are all wrong. And I'm like, what does that mean? Biscuits are all wrong. And it
like,
was the curve. Yep, yeah, it was the
yeah,
curvature of the
yeah,
foot. Yeah, like
yeah,
because I'm looking at them like biscuits. I was like, something wrong with her backside or something. Like I didn't know
yeah,
what she meant, and she was still trying
yeah.
to
It's
describe the curvature of the foot, and I wasn't quite getting it. But yeah, it's
Yeah, because
yeah
it's got to be as upright as you could possibly do it in that soft shoe with the point with the with the
well
leather point.
it wasn't straight. It was too straight was the problem. It wasn't curved
Yeah,
enough. Yeah.
yeah.
So
It's like it's that's but those are the nuances I love. Like in that, like I love like capturing other people's art because like I
yeah.
can learn about it. It's like another way
Yeah.
for me to figure it out.
And actually if I can, I know we want to kind of wrap this up, but I'm like, I
Yeah,
want to ask you guys a question. Like, do you find situations like that from your photography? You get to learn about, because it happens to me all the time. If I'm doing a
it's
building for whatever business or somebody's household and whatever they do as a profession, I get to learn about them and learn new things you never know
It's the
about.
reason.
So
Yeah.
It's I tell people it's the reason why I do this.
yeah,
Like the reason when I was doing photography, it was like I just finished architecture school. At that point, like I was working in user experience design. I was not going to go into architecture at that point because it was like, I finished school in 2013. People were only starting to get rehired, and by then I was making way too much money doing UX. I'm like, I
too late to
can't
go back.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too late, right? And
Yeah.
so I had all this free time, and most of my early photography was like city buildings and shapes and shadows and very architectural kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then when I got into portraits, it was like another thing for me to like translate their narrative into something that's of their own. And so for me, that's the way I'm not going to go to school anymore. I'm done. I got 2 degrees. I'm done with school. So
Yeah.
to learn something new, is to tap into their passions like dance or I did a violin player, softball, like all of the things that they're passionate about. Like tell me about it, tell me all about it, and then we're gonna make something of that. But that way, I'm never gonna be somebody. I'm never gonna be a ballet dancer. Like it's not in the cards for me. But I've learned a little bit about that art form because of having these conversations and trying to make a portrait that accurately represents that art.
Yeah. And Stephanie, you're a fantasy photographer. So what I
Yeah,
actually
so
what is that actually?
well, but it's kind of like mine kind of look like I've taken them straight from like a book or a movie.
Mhm.
And some of them are a little bit surreal as well. So they'll have like their hair floating being held up by like light bulbs or something like that. Um, but some of the time it comes from the client. They're like, oh, I want this kind of thing. Other times they're like, I have no idea what I want. I just like your photography, kind of book a shoot. And I'm like, okay.
They like your
And
so they come to you for your style.
yeah.
Yeah.
She has a
Although
very
saying that,
signature like she can make the unreal real. Like it just that's her thing.
thanks, John.
Right. Yeah.
But I only started photography last March, so I'm still very new to the industry. So yeah, and then I got invited. I've been over this with John already, but I got invited to go and shoot a futuristic fashion photo shoot. So I didn't used to do fantasy. I just did like straight, still moody, but straight kind of photos. And then after that, I kind of dabbled a bit with Photoshop, and I was like, oh my god, I love it. And so that's how it came about. And then I've just gone from there, really.
Okay.
But yeah, it's when I tell people I'm a photographer, they're like, "Oh, right, what do you do? Weddings?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "Newborns?" I'm like, "No." You just need to look to see my stuff's just, it's a bit weird. And I'm here for it. I like that it's a bit weird and it's a bit surreal. And like, yeah.
What about does like, the introduction of like AI and things like that, do you see any effects that
I don't use AI. I get asked a lot, "Oh, is that an AI photo?" I'm like, "No, it's my photography." I think we're gonna have to deal with AI. I don't think it's going away. But I don't think it can ever replace a human brain, because essentially AI is just taking bits from things that have already been made, whereas a human brain brings out new things.
Yeah.
So I think it's a handy tool. I don't really. I've used it occasionally if I wanted to extend my canvas, for example.
Yeah.
So if the photo was cut off a wall or something, I just wanted to extend that wall, I've used it like that. But that's it. I don't really use it for anything else. But I know people like love making entire images from it, but that's not me at all, because I want to use my own brain.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've found uses for it I'll say I have two terms for AI. Is not artificial intelligence necessarily for me. It's either automatic ideas or accidental inventions. And
okay.
yeah, so the automatic idea is there are actual AI rendering tools that I can use with my computer software that I draw. So I can take I can draw a building. It's in 3D, right? I have a 3D image, and I can apply the rendering program and say brick wall, wood windows, black roof, whatever, on the beach, in the woods, those types of prompts, and it'll quickly, like within like 20-30 seconds, will give me like a photorealistic image of kind of what I've done. And the interesting part is I did it one time for a completed project, and I basically listed the materials for the actual project and just see what happened. And there's actually a creativity setting in the tool that I use, so I can turn it up. And when you turn it up, it goes more away from what your original geometry is. So it starts giving you ideas. And
that's where it's handy, right?
Yeah. There was actually, and it was funny because I shared some of the images with my client, who is actually somebody that John knows. It's a college friend of ours, Barb. But yeah, so I sent it to her, and I was like, "Hey, look at the back corner," because they did this thing with it was like a stone base was in the original design, but then the AI put stone all along the back corner of it, and it just looked really interesting. It did something, and they also did something with the entrance that was different and interesting. She's like, "Oh, I love that idea." She's like, "Too bad it's like, already done." And then so it can just kind of give me ideas, especially if you're stuck, because that happens. You get designers block, writers block, whatever. And so and I see that with like, I'm sure writers can utilize that too. I've seen, people with the chat GPT or whatever, they're like, "Hey, write me a 1,000-page or 1,000-word essay on whatever," and something will come up, and then they can utilize that as a starting point.
I found that like in like, in a professional setting when I was doing user experience design, like sometimes you just got to, like, this is pre-AI, you just do it wrong. Just do it wrong, whatever it is, because our brains are so much easier to correct things. So if you just make something and it's crappy, you make the shitty thing, and then you go, okay, now I know everything that's wrong with this, and then you start to get ideas for how to make it better, and then you go, oh, now I can go back to that. It's like you have to respond to something. Sometimes it's just I think it was, and I was going to ask you this earlier, because I noticed this in my years at Drexel, because I was in that transition where like a lot of kids were coming in, they've only known computer design. They didn't start out like you and I did, where we had to like hand draw everything, right?
Right.
Where every line mattered because you had to put it on the page. and using yellow trace to sketch out your original ideas. Like not a lot of them like even thought that way. But I remember I think it was a quote, one of the couple of my professors had worked at Venturi Scott Brown, and they said Denise Scott Brown's thing was, if you get stuck, turn the yellow trace over. Like just it'll break your brain. Just turn like you're working on design, flip the trace paper over and then design on behind it, because at least it jars your brain in a way that's like, okay, now I'm doing something different, but it's still in the same floor plan.
So earlier I just had mentioned AI. The second one was accidental inventions.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you remember, what was his name? It was a professor of ours, Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have him as a professor?
I did. Yeah. I remember like we spent it was at the year, I think you were in my studio. We spent an entire semester making an inanimate object. Like we could not like we weren't allowed to make anything that felt like a building. Like we just he brought in a bunch of crap and just brought it in the studio. He said, make something.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, but how do we do? And he's like, I don't care. Because I don't want it to be a building.
Freshman year, I don't know if you remember the first, it wasn't him, but I think it was all of them. Like one of the first projects you had as your first semester in school was like, go out to the woods and collect some sticks and bring them back and make something. And you're like, well, what do you want? Were we making a church or whatever? And they were just like all the professors like something. And you're like, okay. And it was really a process of figuring out geometry and its relationships.
Yeah. And not being tied to the language of a building that So
yes,
like even like at Drexel, they were like, you don't call it doors, it's openings. It's a wall could just be a series of columns. Like we're not talking, we're talking in abstracts because you need to learn how to design, and design doesn't need to be a building. It's just that's how you got to think through it. But those were fun.
Yeah, and I was gonna I brought up Frank because I remember that class, and I remember exactly what he brought in. When you said it was just a bunch of stuff, it was machine parts. He brought in images of machine parts and what we were supposed to do. Like, so we had a project, like they had a syllabus, and so we had to do an artist studio was the project. But he goes, well, you're gonna take these parts, and he may have said something like, you're gonna make your artist studio from the machine parts. But he wanted you, I think he eventually got to that point, but initially he just wanted you to make something, right? So he came up with an image, and he goes, okay, now take those images and look at them, like put trace over it, start trying to figure out a sketch for what your artist studio is. So I remember my project it wasn't even the floor plan that the image that I had, I traced over. It was actually like the elevation of the studio. And then that led to the whole thing. So that's actually where I'm kind of going. It's interesting because I started recently with all this talk of AI. I started thinking about that studio again and developing ideas. Heck, I designed a row home in school based off of the face of David Letterman on the cover of Rolling Stones magazine. It was a mosaic, and I was stuck, and I just put it down, and I started sketching up. I came up with an idea for a row home. So I'm actually starting. This is actually when I mentioned TikTok, you liked it, John. I saw you like it the other day. This is the starting point of I'm creating this theoretical project called the Compass House. And all I did right now, like the only post I have so far is what I explained earlier about that one software that I use.
You're working on the one facade of the building and seeing like how far could you break it.
I added the prompts, and different things that come up. That was I'm just kind of making a point, but a base for it. What eventually I'm going to do with that is the reason why I call it a compass house is I'm going to take the house and plan and start turning it 45 degrees. But when you hit a setback line, it crushes the house or cuts the house. And then you push that volume over to the other, like as if you were pushing it through the house to create a new plan. So you accidentally could create something from it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's going to take a while, but I'm going to use I want to use TikTok for that, and I think it's a good medium to kind of do short TikTok. Videos.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, it's
my favorite social platform.
I find it. I was on it for a while and was posting consistently, and then I just stopped. for some reason. And looking back, and I'm like, why did I stop? You know, like, and
Yeah.
I
You
don't know.
have to sometimes though, like just life
Yeah.
gets in the way and adulting gets in the way.
Yeah, because it
Um,
can very easily become a job, and people do that as a job. And it's like, I'm not trying to be this to be a job. One, it's for me anyway, I got on it late, like comparatively to a lot of people. I got on it about a year and a half ago. Um, it's a it's a different language. Making videos is its own art form, and it's a variety of vocabulary I had to go learn. And I'm like, okay, let me, am I going to do lip syncing stuff? Am I going to do sounds? Am I going to do am I going to do talking to the camera? And I do a little bit of all of it, but it becomes one of those things where you have to relearn an entire vocabulary. Where I was so used to Instagram, I would post my photos, and that was the end of it, and call it a day.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I think where my difficulty came with it and why I kind of stopped was when we talked about music earlier. Most of my music experience and performances is I've improvised. I freestyle on stage in front of people. Like I don't have a CD of music. Like I've never made an album, but like if you were like, if it was at a show and somebody's like, you want to come to the stage? Like, yeah, sure. And I just come up and do something for 5 minutes and be done with it. So that's how I would do TikTok. Like I was like, no plan, or I might just, an idea came like, hey, I'll give you one example of a video I did one time. I do have a background in like martial arts too, and like the UFC and stuff like that. So I did a fighter, like it was almost as if I was a fighter and I was walking into the office. So I had a hoodie, like a sweatshirt hoodie over, and rather than having the bottle of water, I had a cup of coffee. So as I'm drinking, and I had music playing, and I'm walking back to the office, and I take the sweatshirt off, and I'm, and all that. And eventually I sit down and drink the cup of coffee, and I'm like, all right, time to work, like.
And to start the day.
So I would just like, I have an idea and do it real quick and then leave it at that. So,
yeah, I don't put much thought into mine. I just put it out, but
yeah,
I think it gets the most, is the easiest to get the most organic kind of traction there.
yeah. And I had one video where it was just more of like, I've done like with my background, technical things, like, hey, here's the problem with whatever in your building. So I had a electric outlet here in this building that something was wrong with it. And I did it kind of before and after. I figured out what was wrong with it. I made the fix. And I wrote something, whether it was in the copy of it or maybe like, like the little prompt, you can have some text on the screen pop up that said, I must have used the wrong terminology from electrician's standpoint of whatever was like the ground wire, whatever it was. And the funny thing that happened was people like I guess electricians started arguing in the comments, and it went from, I don't know, like a normal thing that I put on, like the thing I put on the other day, I might get like 300 views on it on average. I wake up in the morning and go, and like, so I'm used to like going into the, the notifications, and there's a couple, these 3 people liked it, and there's a couple comments or whatever. And I'm like scrolling, I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I look at it, I'm like, I have 700,000 views or whatever, 500,000 views on this. And it was like electricians arguing with each other.
That's hilarious.
From a picture of me just like testing an electrical outlet.
I saw a guy post a video, and he said this, like, it was tongue in cheek, but there was some seriousness to it. He said, every video I make, I put at least one mistake in there, and I do it purposely because it will upset somebody enough, and then the comments will just drive my views. And he's
wow.
Well, and to go full circle, and from our conversation when I talked about the Willy Wonka client, he told me one time, like when we were talking about like opening in 2 days, one thing he said, he's like, sometimes I will say things that are wrong. He put it in a more like, he'll say something racist on purpose to get attention.
Wow.
So
that's some dangerous grounds.
Yeah. Well, the guy's a billionaire. I guess he kind of doesn't really care too much, or whatever in relation to that. And
but there's a lot of that. Like there's people who they say outlandish things because that gets attention, and it gets everybody up in arms, and up in arms drives social content. It is rage is the glue that holds social together. It's why it's so toxic, like overall.
Which is quite sad, actually.
Yeah, and he
go on.
Oh, I was just going to add that in that particular case, that client of mine, he was good friends with Donald Trump. So that it was centered around that.
That tells me everything I need
The
to know.
conversation we were having was it was in 2000. It was during actually the 2016 presidential race. You know, so we had a.
I'm really sorry for your Donald support. I can't stand the man. I think it's disgusting.
I am not a fan either.
Oh, gross. Absolutely disgusting, man. Right, I'm gonna have to go because my little boy's going to bed anyway.
All right,
Again,
well, Rich,
thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no problem.